Okay, so those are three characters who I think would make poor rulers. Uh, the four characters who I feel would make good rulers of Westeros. I'll cover them a bit quicker, I guess. I have somewhere to be. First one is Mance Rayder. Mance Rayder is an appealing character to me because he's really one of the few leaders in the series who thinks about freedom. Mance Rayder is a much more liberal kind of ruler. And I feel that the people under his rule would be better off. They would certainly be more free. Mance Rayder would care about what happens to the individual, or he'd at least structure his society, his laws, in a way to respect the individual. And, Mance Rayder is kind of ahead of his time, right? Like, his belief, right? Like, you're not bowing to a king. We're all men, we're all free men and women, I suppose. Just at like the moral level, Mance Rayder is already, leaps and bounds ahead of pretty much any other potential ruler. Mance Rayder is a political mastermind, right? Like, he's unified all of these fractious, squabbling, freemen of the North into an army for the first time ever. And if that wasn't enough, he did it despite being a former member of the Night's Watch, right? Like, he was the guy who everybody in the North hated, and he convinced everybody in the North to join him, to serve him in his army. So that's telling us that he is really pretty smart guy. He's a pretty good leader. He can get people to work together. He can organize, he can rule. And so if you could apply that to all of Westeros, that would be good, especially when combined with his moral strengths. The final point in Mance Rayder's favor is that he knows about magic. And of the four characters who I think would be good rulers, three of them share this trait. Knowing about magic is important because, magic is a real element of the Game of Thrones universe, and it has growing significance to the Game of Thrones world. The fact that Mance Rayder knows, what the White Walkers are, he knows probably how to fight them, or he could at least figure that out. He knows, how to get giants to work for him. He knows about wargs. All these things are going to be useful for what I feel is the coming battle with the White Walkers. Mance Rayder would make a good ruler. Hope he wins, but he probably won't. The next good ruler who might be unintuitive is Littlefinger. And Littlefinger is, of the four people, the only one who doesn't know about magic, and it really counts against him. And if he weren't such a strong candidate in every other regard, it would probably disqualify him, in my mind. But, that said, I should also say that it's a problem for him that he seems like the kind of, pragmatic man of the world type who would be suspicious of magic for a long time. It would take a lot to convince him that, magic was real and it's going to be an imminent threat in the form of zombies coming at you, ice zombies. But, that said, what makes Littlefinger a good ruler? Well, it's simply an economic argument. We're told in the novels that when Littlefinger took over managing the properties for the crown, he increased the crown's income by 7 times. And so when you ask yourself, what trait you want from the ruler, the trait that's most important is going to be improving the well-being of the subjects, I feel. What else could you care about more than making everyone's lives better? And the most obvious, most direct way you can make people's lives better is through economics, by making everybody rich, making it so that people can afford to live a better life. And Littlefinger is really the only one of the characters who has that promise or who has that potential, right? Littlefinger knows about investing. He knows how to grow money, and he's got a history of doing that. So Littlefinger would, if he were to rule the kingdom, would probably make a lot of people rich. And following that prosperity would be peace, most likely. Littlefinger is going to, I believe they say on the show, and they may in the novels as well, I forget, Varys says something like, if Littlefinger could rule the graveyard, he would. Like, if he had to kill everybody else to take charge, he would do that. And I think that is backed up by what we see in the novel. Littlefinger is vicious, and he's going to do what it takes to win, and he's manipulative, and he doesn't really care if his plots cause other people to die. But, that said, if Littlefinger became the ruler, he is probably not going to be involved in any kind of warmongering. Like, there doesn't seem to be a reason that Littlefinger would be starting wars or getting into trouble, getting up to no good, that kind of thing, without a really good reason to. And in that regard, he is probably unique, or at least close to unique, among the other potential rulers of Westeros. Ned Stark, Robb Stark, these guys are going to start a war if their honor is impinged. They're going to start a war because they couldn't work things out with their bannermen. They're going to start a war, when their honor demands it, that kind of thing. Like the Lannister line, they're going to just overspend, go into debt. They're going to start a war, like Joffrey would start a war because he's a crazy guy. Daenerys would start a war because she thinks the morals of the situation require it. Littlefinger, though, right, he's more flexible. He's not going to be bound by honor or law or morality in starting any wars. So his reign is probably going to be more peaceful if he can deal with the ice zombie threat from the north. I think he can. To me, the White Walkers don't seem like a huge threat, especially when someone, all you really need is like the ice zombies begin to overwhelm towns, everyone believes in them, everyone thinks they're real, and then you need like Samwell Tarly to be like, use obsidian, and then, you'll get the White Walkers turned around pretty quick. So they don't strike me as a huge threat. So Littlefinger's economics, his economic policy, his investing in growth is going to make everybody rich. The realm's going to be peaceful. So he seems like a good candidate. Next up is Bran Stark. Bran, I think, is a good guy because he's really kind of a moral character. He's considerate and thoughtful. He's temperate. As the Game of Thrones universe shows us, somewhat simplistically, I guess, is that like the crippled person is good, right? Like the Prince of Dorne, whose name I forget, who has, whatever disease that makes him essentially a cripple, like makes him slow and out of breath all the time. That's resulted in him being a more thoughtful person. And so we see a similar kind of thing happening to Bran Stark, right? Like where once he was an impudent, dangerous, carefree child, he's now become, tempered by tragedy of personal loss, by the deaths of his family, and by his own immobility. Bran is going to be a more careful, cautious person. He's not going to make Robb Stark's mistakes. Bran doesn't believe everything in the universe is going to work out for him. Bran has made mistakes himself. For example, when he sent all the men from Winterfell to go fight off the Viking raiders. But he's going to learn from those mistakes, I feel. And he's not going to make them again, right? Like, you probably wouldn't catch Bran wandering into Walder Frey's hall with just a few guards. He's going to think things through. So that's good about Bran Stark. Probably the best virtue, though, that he has that he is personally powerful, right? Like, he is a wizard of basically unknown ability at this point. He's a warg. He can enter the minds of animals, enter the minds of men, and yeah, whatever his like ultimate magic power is, we don't quite know, but I've got the feeling it'll be very strong, very powerful. Like, Bran strikes me as the full-fledged wizard in the novel. So, like, why I'm getting at, his personal power is, right, like, there's this quote from The Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire that says something like, there's no art nor skill at arms that can protect one man from 100 of his fellows. And so, like, in what that quote means, in context, Gibbon is describing why all the Roman emperors are killed, or like why so many of them are murdered by, like, the emperors of Rome were often murdered by their own guards or just by like random people or senators or whoever. And so Gibbon is trying to, I think Gibbon is the name of the author of that book. Anyway, whoever wrote The Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire is trying to explain why so many emperors die. And the explanation is that, no matter how big of a deal you are, like, okay, you're the emperor of Rome, okay, you're a great guy, you're really smart, but there's no art nor skill at arms. Like, you could be the best sword fighter, but you're still going to die when 100 guys decide to kill you. And that was the problem for the Roman Empire. Like, the Praetorian Guard, the people who ostensibly protected the emperor, could at any point just say, like, we think we'll kill the emperor. And they could, and they did. And that happened a lot, and so that replaced the Praetorian Guard. But then the new guys would just kill the emperor. Or, anyway, I'm getting sidetracked. So, there's neither art nor skill at arms that can protect one man from 100 of his fellows. That's true in our world. It doesn't have to be true in the Game of Thrones universe. If Bran Stark is this super powerful wizard, then he can essentially guarantee his own rulership simply by his own force, through his own, like, well, I'm a wizard. If you kill me, I'll simply sidestep into someone else's body. I'll possess a nearby animal, I'll possess a nearby human, or maybe you just won't be able to kill me because I'll be able to, feel you and predict what you're about to do, and then I'll just magic you to death, or I'll, possess the body of this giant behind me who's going to crush you, something like that. So the fact that Bran Stark is a moral guy who can guarantee his own rulership, that means Bran Stark doesn't have to kind of manage the politics or the political intricacies as well as the other characters do. The other characters have to worry about there's neither art nor skill at arms thing, because they can't possibly defend themselves from, a dozen people next to you decide to kill you. Well, you're dead, unless you happen to be a body-switching wizard. Then maybe you're not dead. And so, as an example of this, you can imagine, right, like Bran Stark confronting Cersei Lannister. You're incestuous and your son is illegitimate, and I'm going to depose you and put Stannis on the throne. I don't think Bran Stark would ever, be so foolhardy. I don't think he would dare those odds even with his power, but we could imagine him in his father's shoes, him as an adult, basically, in his father's shoes. And so then, Cersei says, "Ha! The gold cloaks are on my side, you fool." And Bran Stark, lightning bolts them all to death. Like, oh, well, you outplayed me. I'm a wizard. I'm going to ruin you anyway. So, that's why his personal power is important. His personal power is obviously important because, he can use it as reconnaissance. In a land where a raven is the fastest way to send a message, Bran Stark's ability to look out of the eyes of a tree, that's going to come in handy. So Bran Stark, will bring this kind of well-informed, cautious, temperate rulership to Westeros if he ever becomes the ruler. And I can see him becoming the ruler. He's going to train in the underground lair in the north until he becomes a full-fledged wizard, and that'll be good. And then, he'll get back to Westeros and avenge his brother, and in the course of that, become king. Is a possible future. I don't think it'll happen. As I mentioned, I think the Daenerys-Jon Snow joint venture is going to wind up ruling Westeros. But, yeah, Bran Stark, pretty good guy. I like him as a possible future ruler. The final possible future ruler I have who I think would be good is Daenerys. And Daenerys, she's basically good for fairly similar reasons to Bran Stark. As you can see on the record here, I actually have no idea if you can see this or not. For Bran Stark and Daenerys, I wrote as their two virtues that each are magic and moral. So Daenerys, moral-ish, she's concerned about slavery. That's really her key moral virtue. She doesn't want people to be slaves, and she's willing to, even at great personal cost, basically, she's willing to stand up for what she believes in. She says there will be no slaves, and she's willing to back that up. So, in some sense, the moral significance of this is diminished by the fact that, we understand as readers that the reason Daenerys doesn't like slavery is because her own personal time as chattel sits poorly with her, right? Like, she remembers when she was sold to Khal Drogo. She doesn't like it. So in that sense, we see her anti-slavery position as just being a reflection of kind of self-interest. And so that's why I say she's moral-ish, right? Like, that's not the most moral thing you could believe, or rather, that's not the most moral reason you could have for believing in the evil of slavery. But it's still, it's all right. It's still evidence that she's empathetic, that she considers even peasants, even lowly slaves, essentially as morally significant as she is. So that's promising. That's a promising virtue for a leader. And so she's moral-ish. She, importantly, I think, has the Targaryen bloodline behind her. She'll be a believable ruler for the people of Westeros. People will be okay with following her. She's doing a decent job managing her comeback tour. She's gathering army, she's gathering valuable servants, she is taking over cities, she's ruling them at least reasonably well, she's building strength. And so if we go back to the know a tree by its fruit metaphor, the fruit is pretty good there, right? Like, sure, a few cities wind up much worse because of her involvement, but a lot of slaves are free. Her personal trajectory is just trending up, so she's doing a good job. Magic is another big virtue for Dany. And what I mean by this is the dragons, obviously, that Daenerys can control. If she does a good job controlling them, right now she's doing an okay job. Like, letting him eat the child, I guess, bad. But, the reason why the dragons are so important, well, the dragons are important for a couple reasons. First, when it comes time to deal with the White Walker threat, you probably need magic to repel the ice zombies, right? Like, this is Littlefinger's biggest weakness, is that he's kind of iffy on will he be able to repel the evil ice zombies from the north. Daenerys has the strongest claim, right? Like, what's better for melting the ice zombie threat than dragon's breath. Like, oh, you guys have dragon stone, that's cool. Dracarys, right? Anyway, so Daenerys' dragons are just going to ruin the White Walkers' day should the two ever meet. So that's a big, big virtue. The other reason why the dragons are good, you can conceive of the dragons as like nuclear weapons, basically. And nuclear weapons are a good thing in as much as they prevent war from happening. Since the advent of nuclear weapons, global superpowers have not gone to war against each other. At least like a hot, not cold war against each other. And so that's been untrue throughout human history. Like, major competing superpowers eventually go to war with each other throughout history. Unless one or both of them have nuclear weapons. And then they don't go to war because nobody wants to, mix it up with nuclear weapons. Dragons are going to be the same thing. Dragons are going to let Daenerys conquer Westeros. It doesn't matter how high your walls are. It doesn't matter how... We're going to melt you. We're going to fly over you. We're going to rain devastation on you. And your army is just going to flee in terror when they see a full-size dragon, or 3 of them circling, Daenerys. So dragons are going to let Dany conquer Westeros. But more than that, they're going to let her keep it. There will be no rebellion in Westeros when Daenerys has the dragons on her side. There will be no foreign invasion of Westeros when dragons are going to rise to the defense of the country, right? Like, the dragons are going to be the peacekeepers. And it's plausible to me that the dragons will continue, right? Like, their line will continue. The 3 dragons will produce other dragon eggs. Actually, as I say this now, I don't actually remember the gender of the 3 dragons. Anyway, I guess that's beside the point. For Daenerys' lifetime, for the dragon's lifetime, they're going to guarantee kind of peace in Westeros once Daenerys has control over it. And that's a huge virtue. So I guess that about wraps up what I think of the characters. If I were to, give each of them a probability of becoming ruler of Westeros, I'd say the likelihood is Daenerys, Littlefinger, Bran, Mance Rayder, in terms of the people who I think would be good. Who the best character to rule would probably be between Littlefinger and Bran Stark. Maybe, the most likely rule, I think, is the joint Daenerys, Jon Snow rule Westeros, along with possibly a third person. And, Daenerys can kind of temper the flaws in Jon Snow. Daenerys is more complicated from a moral perspective. She's more considerate of other people. And she's less prone to villainy. And Jon Snow brings to the table, he's all right. I don't know. He doesn't bring anything to the table, but I think he's going to wind up marrying Daenerys just because of their shared patrilineage. Anyway, that wraps up my thoughts on Game of Thrones. I'm not sure what I'll talk about next.